Hey everybody, Gisele Grenier here. So an email that I've been getting on a regular basis for the last 10 years has been driving me crazy. I thought I'm going to do a video. That way when I get the next email, I'll say, check this out. How do you know what brush to use for your next painting project? How do you know what brush to use for if you're using certain types of paint, if you're doing painting a certain type of thing? The quick answer is depends. It depends. What I want to do is kind of break it down into smaller components that will make it a lot easier, because what I like may not necessarily be what you like. Okay, and the supplies that I have will likely not match what you have, and the paint that I have likely won't match what you have either. So, but what I'm going to talk to you about in this video can be applied to anything. So let's go down to the table, and I just want to quickly go over some different brushes. So we have, first of all, we have long-handled brushes and we have short-handled brushes. Easy thing on that, if you're painting at an easel, use a long-handled brush. If you're not painting at an easel, use a short-handled brush. That's it. The long-handled brush is simply when you can hold it and you can paint further away from the easel, which makes it much easier when creating your composition and painting, because the further back you stand, your eyes are seeing the whole piece and not something that's so focused. Okay, but when you're painting fine detail, you will need to get closer to the easel, and many times is the actual little fine detail brushes are only available in short handled. It depends on where you get your brushes. So first thing, at an easel, go to a long handled brush. And for working with details on an easel painting, you can go with whatever detail brush you have available, whether it's long or short handle. Okay, that's the first thing. Then you've got the actual bristle type. So if we go down again to the table, we have natural bristle, which is sometimes made from pig hair. We have synthetic Taklon, a Sable Tech. This is a synthetic sable. What's this one? I'm thinking it's maybe the same thing. This is an Escada brush. I love this brush. Not quite sure of the hair. Then you have a synthetic. This is to mimic a bristle, but it's synthetic. You're really not supposed to use hog brushes in acrylics because of the pH balance and all this other mumbo jumbo. It splays out the brushes. To me, that's a load of hogwash. I use whatever brush does the job. The only rule is if you use a brush in acrylics, you can then take that into oils, but then you can't bring it back. If you use a brush into oil paint, you cannot bring it back into acrylics, because once you clean the brush, it doesn't matter what you do, there will be some type of residue left over, and then you may contaminate your acrylics. If you want to go ahead and do it, by all means. I'm just telling you that, there's some rules that you just can't break. So if you talk to brush makers, so hog bristles really aren't supposed to be only for oils. I've used them for acrylics and actual painting landscapes. I prefer them for acrylics. The actual synthetic ones, you can't do a heck of a lot of scrubbing with these. These are nice, but I prefer the actual hog bristles. And then synthetic, the Taklons are great for detail. You can use them for covering wide areas. You can use them for detail. And then it comes to the springiness. So where bristle brushes, depending, sometimes are nice and stiff because they can hold thick paint. Where the synthetic, they're a little bit softer, so they can still hold thick paint. Personally, depending on the brand, I still prefer the hog. And then the Taklon, this one here, much, much softer. So you think of that as well. So I'm saying so a lot. Again, because everything, it depends. It depends on what you're going to be doing. Stiff brushes are best for thick paint, but you can use them for thin paint as well. And very soft brushes are much better for thinner paints. When I say thick paints, all that stuff, so if I had to assign, brushes for these pieces, for the fluid acrylics, I really can use anything, but I would not use my synthetics, because those are specialized for oils. But you can use a Taklon, a synthetic bristle, or a regular bristle. Ideally, though, the Taklon is best because it's a very soft brush and the fluid acrylics are softer. But I have used my, not this size, but my number 8 Bristle Bright with the fluid acrylics, and it works fine. Whereas you've got the medium consistency paint, where in thicknesses, so you've got the fluid acrylics, and then I've got my Deco Art American premium tubes, okay, the premium acrylics, and then the Deco Art Tradition, which is professional. These thick paints work better with the stiffer brushes. I have trouble using this paint with a very, very soft brush. So this little brush here, it looks like a little synthetic, very soft synthetic brush. It's a little soft for this. What happens if you load the brush and you're having a hard time getting any type of detail, it just goes like this. So good stiff brushes work well with thick paint. And then with the Traditions, really can use anything. I can use anything because the paint is in a mid-range in consistency, that it's not too thick, not too thin. I can add water to make it a little bit thinner or medium, and then if I want to make it thicker, I just stir it up over about an hour just to let some of the water evaporate, and it thickens up a little bit. I can use any brush. The other thing is when you're working with really super fine detail brushes, like this little puppy here, it's a tiny, tiny little brush, that you are going to have to use thin paint. You can't use thick paint with this unless you're dipping and making texture blobs, but you need to use thin paint for stuff like this. Then you've got little brushes like this, which is it's like a little bristle brush like this, but ultra short. You can use anything. The whole thing is loading the brush with paint and then rubbing off the excess, and then you're going to use a dry brush. So any paint will work with this. And then you've got ones here that have a medium spring, are good for an all-purpose brush, which is good for really any paint. But going with brushes like this, these like one's a synthetic sable, and then the other one, I don't know what this one is. I'm thinking maybe the same thing. I don't know. For the price point of this brush, I'm thinking it's more Badger. I'm not sure. These are good for thick paint, and then you can just load a little bit, rub it into the brush, and then you can do your painting. But I use these primarily for oils. I tried using this one for acrylics, and it didn't work. It's just so soft. So I hope that this helps a little bit. So the thicker the paint, the stiffer the brush. Long-handled for easel paintings, short-handled for where you're working on something smaller. For tiny detail brushes, whatever you have in long or short doesn't matter. Tiny detail brushes needs to be used. You need to use thinner paint because the tiny little detail brushes just won't hold thick paint. Short domed bristle brushes are good for any type of paint, loading it up, wiping off the excess, and then dry brushing. Hog brushes are supposed to be, typically supposed to be for oil, blah, blah, blah. I use it for both oil and acrylics. If you take a brush into acrylics, you can then use it in oils, but don't use a brush in oils and take that same brush and use it in acrylics because you will likely contaminate your acrylics. You've got synthetic bristles. They are nice and stiff, but personally I find it a little bit harder to do dry brushing on this. And then you've got Taklon brushes, depending on the brand, can be quite soft, but are really, really nice for detail. So I hope that this gives you a little bit of help. And if there's any specific brush or any specific project that you want to do and you're not quite sure what to do, first of all, I'm going to tell you try it. Do an experiment and try it. But if you're still not sure what to do, is post below the brand of paint you're using, whether it's thick, medium, or thin, and then the actual brush. Pictures would be best if you could just post pictures. And then if I have those materials, then I can do the experiment for you. Otherwise, we can have a discussion and work through all of that. Alrighty, so I hope this helps. If you have any questions, please post them below. Alrighty, so until I see you in the next tutorial, stay inspired.